to Leader You by Black River Performance Management, where we believe work should fuel the human spirit, not drain it. In this leadership podcast, we will dive into the lived experiences of people flourishing in today's workplace and beyond. Join us to hear real-life examples of experiences from our own lives and from the leaders we know and trust. Thank you for joining us on the Leader You podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing a dear friend, Michelle Mahoney. She has spent her career putting communication principles into action. She began her journey in television news after graduating from California State University, Fresno. She went on to earn a teaching and a master's degree to pursue a career in education. Along the way, she directed high school forensics and debate program and served as the public information officer for a K-12 school district. She has almost 15 years of experience as faculty in higher education, teaching a variety of communication, media arts, and public relation courses. She currently teaches at Boise State University and serves as an ombuds to faculty and staff. Michelle is excited to help deliver content that provides students with enrichment, growth, and career opportunities in the business environment. As an emotional quotient certified instructor, she aims to bridge education and EQ in her classroom for all of her students. Thank you so much for joining us today, Michelle. I'm excited to have a conversation with you. Really excited today.
Thanks for having me, Angie. It's a pleasure.
Yeah. So we're going to get right into it, like emotional quotient. We're going to talk about leadership competency, interpersonal skills is what we're talking about today. But a part of that is our communication styles. A part of it is our conflict styles, becoming more aware of those, having more social self-awareness and social awareness, being able to regulate things and understand more about ourselves so that we can have more meaningful conversations and collaborations. So, I mean, I can't think of anybody more that I could discuss this with. You and Michelle Bennett, who I've had on the podcast already, are two that I really look to and admire as it relates to communication training and teaching, and you're also incorporating the emotional intelligence piece into your students, and that's kind of how we connected through Michelle and our relationship, and just going to a conference together, getting to know how all of this stuff plays together. It's not, even though they're different skills, I would say that emotional intelligence is one of the skills that will enhance all of that. What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, Angie, the admiration is mutual. I respect you and the work you're doing so much, and I look to you for that leadership and guidance that I think everyone needs in their career at times, to have that mentorship, friendship, and the alignment of what we value is so rich. I love that. So the feeling is mutual, and I do appreciate all of the nice things you've said. I do believe that we can be better teachers, better leaders, better partners if we have a little coaching in this area. And that is really what I've dedicated this part of my career to, and what I'm most excited to share with my students. They may not even know I'm sharing it, but I am buried into the content, woven into the content. So
yeah. So that's where you get to practice it every day, but we will dive into personal relationships, experiences, adult children, teenagers, like how conflict is actually a part of life, and how we frame it matters, and how our backgrounds and our backstory shape some of that as well. So, I mean, if you want to first kind of share your story and how you ended up teaching this, and kind of how did you dream of this when you were a little girl, or what was it?
I most certainly did not.
Yes, that's how it usually goes.
I most certainly did not. I think my big dreams started in high school, and the dream was to be a television news anchor. And that's really what I wanted to do. I set my mind to that, and I did get to accomplish that goal. It was really an exciting and fulfilling position. Little did I know, upon reflection, this was my outcome all along. This is where I was meant to be all along, because that position as a reporter, all I did every day was relate to people and connect with people and get them to share their stories. And there was never a dull moment. I tell my students to this day, it was one of my top two favorite jobs, anchoring, reporting, and what I'm doing now. So that was the front end of my career. And now that I'm 50, I would say that this is probably one of my last stops in my career as I grow this piece of the journey.
Hmm.
And they have been my two favorites.
That's
So
awesome.
I'm really excited and to do that and to have the I guess the luxury, the honor to do those things. So I did. I started out in television news and did a little bit of radio and other types of production work with news and journalism before I moved into education. And the funniest story about how I got into education, I think it's funny at least, or maybe a little ironic. I'm sitting at my desk in Fresno, California at the Fox affiliate there, KMPH Channel 26. And I get a phone call out of the blue, and I answered it, and I knew immediately the voice on the other end. It was my high school video production teacher, Mr. Ramon Pacina. And he said, Michelle Bargy, which is my maiden name. And I said, Mr. Pacina. And that relationship that I built with him in high school found me again in my 20s. And
Wow.
he was the one that said, there's an opening at your alma mater. Come and coach debate. You did that in high school. Think you'd be great. You'd be a fabulous teacher. And I just went, okay. And I said yes. And
Hmm.
so that was how the journey started. And it's ironic that every single moment, pivotal moment in my life has always started with the relationships.
Yeah.
Um, it always starts there. It's never about anything else. It's always about the people. And when you follow the good people and you follow that dream, it somehow comes together. So
Mm.
that was how I got into education, was in the high school arena, and then worked on my master's and such, and got into college later. So
Wow. Well, I'm relating to that, and I just got goosebumps when you said that about the people and the relationships, because I would have to say I echo that, and there's really nothing special about me or what I'm doing, but really it comes down to the relationships that I have and the people that believe in me. There's plenty of ones that don't, right? Like, but there's
mhm,
so many that do. The good relationships that you have, how much that one person can change your life by making a phone call, thinking of you, asking you to speak at that conference. What one little doorway that that person opens can actually change somebody's trajectory.
absolutely. And that's what happened to me with Mr. Pacina. And he put me on a path to education. And I'll always be grateful to him for that. And we still connect on Facebook, and
Mm,
uh, he always has kind words. But what you just said about that person always being in your corner and thinking about you,
mm,
I didn't know that this man was thinking about me and the talent he saw in me all those years ago. And it was, it's mind blowing when you think about the possibilities that you create for yourself when you just take a moment to focus on the relationships and
mm-hmm,
focus on the people around you. And I don't believe, and we can get into this a little bit later, but I don't believe that that's innate in all of
mm-hmm,
us. I think we can definitely hone that skill.
mm-hmm.
It's important to know that you may not think you're born with the deep relation building type of skill, but you are. Every one of us is capable of it.
Absolutely. And that's what we're all about, skills development. And even
Yeah,
if you're not a good communicator, you're not very good at it, all these are mindsets and they're literally stories we tell ourselves. We can get so much better if we decide we want to.
right.
We
I agree
just
with
go
that.
straight into, I'm getting better at communication. I'm becoming better at giving feedback. I'm becoming a great communicator. I am working towards these are skills. You don't go out and walk out to the fairway and become a great golfer without putting some time in on the course. You don't become a great athlete. You don't become a great chef. You don't become great at any skills until you put time in, right? And
Exactly.
and
That's so
so
true.
communication is no different. And everybody comes from so many different perspectives and, backstories and everything else that it's one skill that I don't think we ever stop learning. And I think we have the ability to improve. I say this a lot. We have the ability to improve our communication until we take our last breath.
Oh, that's beautiful. And it's true. It is so true. All it takes is just a little effort on our part
Mm-hmm.
in sharing of ourselves and allowing ourselves, to get vulnerable and say yes instead of saying no and
Mm-hmm.
closing ourselves off all the time. I think of all of the good things that have come into my life because I chose to say yes
Mm-hmm.
and wasn't scared of the outcome. I
Mm-hmm.
just went for it, just like
Mm-hmm.
you said, one
Mm-hmm.
foot in front of the other, making strides towards that goal. And sometimes you don't even know what your goal is until you get on your journey. I
Right.
thought I was going to be in television news forever. I loved it. It was great. But I knew that I had a deeper calling and that there was something in me that wanted to share more,
Mm-hmm.
more on a one-on-one level.
Yeah.
So, so you just never know. And when you're open to the possibilities, it's, your future is really unwritten and infinite. You can do whatever you
Absolutely.
want.
Absolutely. So let's just start talking about interpersonal skills, and maybe you could frame up just different conflict styles for our listeners that might need a review or may
Sure.
never even have heard of it.
Sure. So one of the most lacking skills I see, not just in my students who I would put into the Gen Z category at this moment in college, they're approximately the sophomore college age traditional student at this time. I've taught I've taught non-traditional students, all ages, but at this time in my life, I'm teaching the what you would say is Gen Z, kind of
Mm-hmm.
like that sophomore age. And what I am seeing in this group of students, and it's been present for quite some time, I would say even with the millennial generation that I also had the privilege of being of teaching at one point, the conflict management skills are lacking.
Mm-hmm.
And I have my own anecdotal reasons why I think this exists, and I think social media and hiding behind a keyboard plays a lot into the avoidance
Mm-hmm.
style that I've seen develop. But I also think it's just young people in general. We just haven't developed that skill yet, and you have to have someone show you not just one way, which I see a lot of avoidance
Mm-hmm.
these days, avoiding all conflict, um, instead of exploring other conflict management styles. So, and by the way, my own children at this time are also of that generation.
Mm-hmm.
I have a soon to be 21-year-old and a 19-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
So I am constantly coaching with my own children ways to advocate for themselves. And, sometimes you don't even think of advocacy as conflict management, but self-advocacy is conflict management.
Mm-hmm.
You have to advocate for yourselves at all times in this life because there's not a lot of people that are going to do it for you.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that can be seen as conflict in certain contexts. So to kind of cue up the conflict management styles that I commonly refer to, I always go back to the Thomas Kilmann conflict mode instrument. And it's one that I've been teaching for years. And so when we think about the 5 styles, we think about, and you can think about where you might stand on this issue, or if perhaps you vacillate depending on context, which is what is more common for people, I think, is they go between modes depending on context and relational context.
Mm-hmm.
So are you an accommodator, meaning you'll just do whatever, to avoid the conflict, you'll go with the flow?
Mm-hmm.
Are you an avoider? You just avoid it at all costs? Are you a compromiser? Are you willing to give and take? And then there's collaboration, which is just what it implies, coming together to form maybe better ideas, maybe bigger ideas. Um, and then the last would be competing, where you always have to win.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think in different parts of our lives, we may turn on different conflict modes more than others. So when you're thinking about your own conflict style, you can think of it in terms of how do I behave most commonly in the workplace
Mm-hmm.
with my peers or my boss or, clients. Then you can think of how do I most commonly behave in situations with friends. And then perhaps you can even use, if you're interpersonally involved in a relationship with a significant other, you can say, how do I behave with my significant other? And I have slightly different styles for all 3 contexts of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's important for me to realize this because when I'm in the context of a work situation, I am more likely to be an accommodator
Mm-hmm.
and just go with the flow and not make waves. But when it comes to my own home, my husband in particular, I would say I'm definitely more into the compromise or collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
That's we've been married for 30 years. We've had to develop that skill. So it takes us a long way. And perhaps when I was younger, maybe it was more of a compete where I had to win every argument. I just don't care anymore. I
I
don't
hear
care
you.
to win
Yeah.
I don't know about you, Angie. I mean,
I love age.
do you see, huh, what's
I
that?
love aging for that reason.
Oh, I know. It's just wonderful because you just don't care as much about the little stuff. Where would you see yourself with your context in your life? Do you
I'm
have
all over the map with them. I notice the context really matters and how passionate I am about, and if it's a hill I want to die on, like really. But it really, what that comes down to is my self-awareness on how do I show up in this kind of situation, or if I didn't like how a situation went, why did I go down that path, and how can I pick a different path in the future, right? So knowing that, but I would say, in business, I try to be. I think I try to stay in the collaboration place, but I know there's certain instances when I'll be triggered and I might be in a compete, or there may be, the accommodate. Sometimes, like you said, with aging, I'm accommodating a lot of times too, because I just don't care that much. I care about the person. I care about the relationship oftentimes more than being right. And
yes.
so I think that comes from a soulful place versus an ego place, and that ego probably comes from some kind of way that you had attachment styles, right? Like it comes back to our childhood. So
Always does. It always kind
yeah,
of loops around to that.
yeah,
And I agree with you. It's not that you don't care about the person, it's that you just care about the relationship and preserving the relationship more. And it also depends on how often you have to interact with that person,
for
if it's
sure.
that important. So if it was a person that I had to interact with on the daily, I might be more open to saying, okay, we need to iron this out. We need to get into the compromise, collaborate mode because
Hmm.
this isn't working.
Hmm.
And if it was just once in a while, I take some of my family members, for example. I
Mm.
don't always align with them on every issue, and some are very vocal about their opinions and beliefs. And I just listen for the most part. And I guess you could say it's an accommodate or an avoid. I just don't want to go there because it's not worth it to me. If I see
Yeah,
those people once a year or every 2 years, it's not worth it to me. But there are times when it's very important to me. And I can give you an example from
yeah,
the workplace if you want to hear it.
I do.
Uh, and I found myself going into this more compete mode. And it goes back to what something you said about how passionate you are about something or how much something is going to affect you in, financially or emotionally or whatever.
Hmm.
And this was a case where over the summer, uh, someone, and I won't get into too much of a specific scenario here, but someone went through and decided they were going to clean up things at in my department, and they reassigned me at a certain level that was not where I was. And with that came a reduction in pay. And I, of course, what would your first instinct be when you're just arbitrarily cut and no one
Defense.
reached out to you?
Yeah,
There's no communication around it.
I'd be defensive right off the bat.
Oh, I had to give it the 24-hour rule.
Yeah.
And I had to really put into practice some of the things that I have been talking about with um, to my own children, to my own students, my own relationships. I had to take that 24-hour breather
Hmm.
and think it through and give them a little bit of grace that perhaps they just overlooked something. And I'm
Hmm.
really glad I did that because that is exactly what had happened. And I still wasn't happy that the communication piece was missing. That should never have happened in the first place because I believe that you should always reach out and communicate those changes to your staff, to your colleagues, where if you're the one making changes, you need to be the communicator, you need to
Hmm.
be the one taking the initiative. So I still feel that was lacking, but I gave the grace and the
Mm.
24 hours, And I was able to step out of that compete,
Mm-hmm.
more of a place of anger, and went into more of a place of, okay, let's figure this out together, and what happened, and shared records and whatever I needed to share to fix the wrong. But boy, when your livelihood and your bottom line is on the line, and
Mm-hmm.
someone is and it can be money, or it can be your ego, or whatever it is, your
Mm-hmm.
pride. You have to think about those trigger points for you,
Mm-hmm.
and what is going to set you off, and what is going to be your trigger. For me, that just happened to really strike a nerve.
Mm-hmm.
And
A hot wire.
it was a hot wire. It was a hot wire, but
Yes. Yeah.
I was really grateful that I
Mm-hmm.
was able to step back and take it from that compete, where I was going to lay it out, lay it on the line, and be
Yeah.
really angry, but instead took a breather and said, could it
Mm-hmm.
have been this that occurred? Let me give you some grace here. And in some cultures, they call that allowing the other person to save face.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the contexts of communication, is understanding culture.
Mm-hmm.
So, allowing that person to save face a little bit, and to come to a new conclusion
Yeah,
that
we're
was
not
more
very
helpful.
graceful. And what a skill. That is a skill that it takes some self-awareness. It takes regulation, being able to recognize, and also being able to say, I recognize right now I'm emotionally hijacked and I'm not going to make really any good decisions at this point. I'm going to say something that I'm going to regret. It's not going to go well. I might
Right,
lose my job, like literally, if I say everything that's going on in my mind right now.
right.
So this is a time where I just need to maybe phone a friend, whatever you need to do,
Yes,
go for a run, definitely sleep on it, talk to your spouse, call a friend, do whatever you can to like walk yourself through it before you have this conversation, instead of having it in that space and grace in between to let you come down to at least being in that normal homeostatic space versus being hijacked, full red, ready to
full
go,
red.
full red,
Right,
you know. When you get back to that green place of kind of in flow, or just like when you don't feel the emotion about it, that's when the conversation. You're not saying you were a doormat and you let somebody just walk all over you, because I think sometimes people think when you do that, you're giving in. And that's actually not what the goal is, to
right,
give in. It's to wait until you're in a better state.
right. And you want to let your logic take over instead of just all heart. And there's a place for both in our world, but and in our lives. But you just, sometimes the logic has to prevail,
Mm-hmm.
especially when your emotions are running so hot. And that, talking about emotional intelligence, having that self-awareness,
Mm-hmm.
I may not have had that 20 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
10 years ago. And,
Mm-hmm.
you know, having that emotional awareness and that self-awareness is really, really helpful in those
Mm-hmm.
types of situations.
How is it helping your students getting to know how are you integrating communication and emotions in the classroom, and how does that come alive in those conversations and the reflections that your students are telling you? Like, it's got to be just like mind-blowing to see how they see how they go together.
They do. And when we talk about conflict styles, and I sometimes, if we have time, I'll let them do the Thomas Kilmann instrument themselves, and
Mm-hmm.
kind of see where they fall into the different categories. And a lot of them come up with, at this point in their lives, they're avoidant or
Mm-hmm.
accommodating. And so I like to try to show them that you can be a collaborator, and sometimes you can advocate for yourself when you need to win. And,
Mm-hmm.
you have to, we call it competing. It's not just about competing, it's not just about winning, but I think it's about advocacy too for yourself. Like, sometimes you're right and it
Mm-hmm.
needs to be done that way, and there's certain reasons why you would need to frame it as such. But a lot of them find themselves falling into that accommodation or avoidant
Mm-hmm.
category, and it's really interesting to hear the why. And to hear my students talk about it, they get really nervous when they are in the midst of conflict. And think about your own feelings with conflict. Don't you still get nervous?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't love it. The feelings that they're uncomfortable for people, right?
They're so uncomfortable. You get the
Yeah.
butterflies in your stomach, you feel sick to your stomach,
Mm-hmm.
all of the physiological symptoms that you can think of, those still happen even when you're pretty confident in your conflict style.
Yeah.
So I love helping these 20 to 23-year-olds kind of come into their own on how they can advocate for themselves. It doesn't need to be the end of a relationship. As a matter of fact, done correctly, conflict management is a relationship growing tool.
Mm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
they can really learn to grow their their relationships
Yeah.
by talking through things and not just, going around issues all the
Or
time. So,
labeling someone as toxic and then moving on, right? Like seems to be kind of what's going on in society. Everything's toxic and everything's traumatic. And it's like, I don't mean to minimize what is toxic and what is traumatic, but everything's not toxic and everything's not traumatic.
you and I at one time, we had talked about big T, little t
Yeah.
trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say big T, little t toxic too.
Yes.
Same concept. Not everything needs to be taken with the same severity or the same approach. It's everyone, if we're all, well, maybe we all are toxic. I don't know,
Yeah.
but it can't all be toxic. You need,
No, all or never, all or none. There's always this gray area that, it's not one way or the other. I think that when you don't have the skill to communicate and have difficult conversations, it's easier to just let a relationship go.
yeah. And back to what we started this podcast with, the idea that all of our lives are built on relationships, all of the goodness, all of the love, all of the riches and of wealth. I'm not just talking about monetary, I'm
Yeah.
talking about
Yeah.
spiritual wealth. It all comes from your relationships. So if you're just writing off people at the first sign of a problem, you're going to be writing off people that really could bring a lot of wealth into your life, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, financially. I don't know, whatever it is.
Hmm.
Um, and that's just really sad when you think about that.
And it's
Uh,
a lonely place to be up on the high horse.
ooh,
It
yes.
really is. I mean, you find yourself alone when you have got it all figured out and everybody else is the problem. But then when you really take the time to look and you realize everywhere you go, there you are. And that's the person you're actually having the problem with.
Exactly. And you could see this pattern. I mean, I'm sure we've all had friendships like this. Perhaps you see it in yourself with your relationships with significant others. You repeat the same behaviors, you're going to get the same result. And that brings a lot of unhappiness. And I by no means am claiming to be any sort of expert, far from it. If
Mm,
anything, I say I fail every day. I'm just
mhm,
willing to fail forward every day.
mhm,
I'm willing to take chances and be vulnerable with people that I care about. And I I try my best to connect and not always do things behind a screen or behind the phone, to really get in front of that, and
mhm,
for important conversations, to have those conversations face to face.
mhm.
So I think that's a big part of it as well.
Yeah,
But
and I think even part of conflict could even be apologizing. I know that for some people it's really hard, and what people that I've coached, and even when I was younger, it was kind of an ego thing. But the older I've gotten, the more mistakes I've made, the more I've disappointed people, friends, children, anybody in my life that I care about or love.
mhm.
That's where I recognize how important apology is and admitting when you have messed up and how you know you can do better. I feel like that really gives some grace and some glue to the relationship, especially if you try to change the behavior and you don't continue it, right?
Exactly. And I know you have adult children as well.
Yeah.
When they were growing up, did you apologize when you messed up as a mom?
I think I do it better now than I did when they were younger, but I also think that I was kind of fearful of making mistakes and kind of probably oversensitive to the point where I may have taken their words. Yeah, I definitely would have apologized, probably a little too much because I was trying to be kind of do a 360 from the way I was raised. So I was super sensitive, maybe a little too oversensitive in the way that I maybe
Maybe
gave them too much power sometimes, you know?
yeah. Well, maybe the confidence just wasn't there yet, even
Yeah.
though it should have been. But looking back, of course, that's the gift of hindsight
Yeah.
that we have. Ooh,
Yeah.
I remember I don't remember the exact first time I apologized, but I remembered when I started realizing that I needed to apologize to my children when I did something wrong, when I overreacted. I tend to be an overreactor.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of an anxiety thing, I think, that
Mm-hmm.
I scare easily. It doesn't
Yeah.
it doesn't take much to scare the
Yeah.
daylights out of me. I mean, you could jump around a corner and I'll fall for it every time.
Yeah.
But so I would tend to overreact in situations. And so just apologizing for that behavior, because I know that that's not healthy for
Yeah.
children to experience all the time. But I think that was when I realized, oh boy, I have some work to do. I
Mm-hmm.
have a lot of work to do. And yeah, the apology is big. I
It is.
I don't know about you, but early in my relationship with my husband, Matt, we were kids. We were babies. I was 18 years old when we started
Mm-hmm.
dating, and he was all but what, 20, 21. And so we've grown a lot together over the years. And we used to have to just have a really quick out
Mm-hmm.
for fights and arguments. And so we'd have a countdown where we had to just apologize. If someone started the countdown, you were in it, you had to apologize. And looking back, this is before I had any training in conflict management or taught a student or was a mom. We were just doing what we had to do to get through the day. Like, how are we going to make this work? And sometimes just having a silly little way out, so you can immediately quelch the conflict and then come back to it later. Like we
Mm-hmm.
talked about earlier, letting yourself breathe, have some time to think things through, and not letting hot heads rule the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really helpful for us. It
Yeah.
was just, I don't know if you have any little quick out techniques to just squelch until you can come back and revisit when you have a cooler mind.
Yeah, I love that. Just Rob and I will do something like I need I need some time to think. I need to process. Can you just what you're saying is important, and I need to process that, and let's touch base here. I'll be back in a little bit. I got to go do this or that. Let me finish up dinner, and then let's re. And what I also think that really helps is recognizing that this person is most of the times not trying to hurt you.
Right.
Most times it came out a way they didn't mean to say it, or my perception of it's different. So giving them the benefit of the doubt, or some grace, some space and some grace also, trying to see something from their perspective. That's part of the empathy and understanding and compassion, knowing that, just as I'm human and I make mistakes, so do they, and they may not have meant it. Just kind of like the example of the person that was leading you and took changed your role. They may have made a mistake or overlooked it. They weren't out to get you.
Right. Right. They
Yeah.
were not. And that is the piece that I had to do some real thinking on. And I'm glad I did, because it was not intentional, it was not purposeful. Life went on. They
Mhm.
probably don't even give this a second thought. Although for me, it it was important, and it was a big deal to
Mhm.
advocate for myself in that manner. And the other person may not have even seen it that way at all.
Mhm.
So having that ability to empathize with your relational partner, whether it's a spouse or child or boss or
Mhm.
whatever, is really important, because we need to be able to try and put ourselves in their shoes and have that empathy, at what they might be thinking, what they might be feeling, or what they're not, what it wasn't about at all.
Right.
You're bringing your own baggage to the situation. And in our younger years, my husband and I didn't have a lot of tools.
Mm-hmm.
We had to make it up as we went along. We made up our own tools. And now we use more of the strategy you just described. Like, give me some time to process. Let's come back to that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what we were doing even at that younger age. But having those tools is so important. You
Mm-hmm.
have to have something to be able to get you from a place of anger or sadness or confusion or whatever it is to that place of clarity and peace and understanding. I think that's just the most important thing we can do.
For sure. And you mentioned something a second ago that I want to circle back on, which was the hotheads, not letting the hotheads rule the conversation. And that's a skill in itself too. When you have somebody that wants to fight and wants to win, and they're not going to let you have a break, and they don't recognize boundaries. Now how do you coach your students, or what if they have a boss like this? How do you coach your students through some of those kinds of situations? Or have you been in those situations where somebody didn't respect your boundaries or what you were asking for at the time?
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure you have too. We've all
Mm-hmm.
been in those situations where the boundaries just weren't there. And I think that is when your own personal boundaries really just have to come into play. And you can use I statements. I'm not comfortable with this conversation, and I am going to choose to come back to it in a couple of days and leave it at that.
Mm-hmm.
You don't always have to bend to the whim of the louder voice in the room. You
Mm-hmm.
don't always have to do what, just because they're louder or more forceful or feel like they have to win. You can frame it in such and use your I language. I feel this way. You're not pointing fingers saying you did this or you did that. That's just going to trigger them even more to
Mm-hmm.
go into more of a compete mode. But rather, this is what I feel when we talk about this issue, or this is what I'm going to choose to do to make myself feel safer in this scenario. And that's really all at the end of it all, what we're in charge of is ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So coaching people to talk through those scenarios with that I language, the I perspective, I think that's really important.
Mm-hmm.
Taking ownership of your feelings and not assigning blame to the other person. That's a great technique to use. And then also not using ambiguous language, but not necessarily calling out the person and making a personal attack, but calling out the behavior that is in question. So an example I would give is, your partner didn't take out the trash. And instead of saying something like, you're so lazy, the trash is overflowing. Instead, you could say something like, I feel really overworked and when I have to take on the chores that we have decided on and we've divvied up. I feel really overworked when the trash is overflowing and I have to pick up the slack for chores that are not agreed upon. So could going forward, could you please let me know if it's something you're going to need assistance with that week? And if it is, I'm happy to help. But if not, could you please abide by the guidelines we set so that our needs are all met? Something along those lines. I know that sounds a little out there, but it's not just about the garbage,
Right.
right? It's garbage is the metaphor, but
Yes.
it's not calling people lazy because they didn't take out the
Mm-hmm.
garbage. It's about setting the boundaries and expectations for your own feelings around the garbage and
Yeah.
how you want to proceed going forward. So,
Yeah. We also try to not um, generalize or make sweeping generalizations like you always or you never, because
oh, that's
that's
a good one.
almost never true. It's always, if you hardly ever always do something or hardly never do it. So we have a joke about it. We don't get to say always or never. We just say you always never. So,
That's
and
funny.
it makes us
Yeah.
laugh, and then it's like, okay, you always never forget to empty the dishwasher, and then it's like, okay, whatever. We recognize that sometimes we just get sidetracked, and neither one of us are trying to be lazy or forget things or whatever, but we just try not to make the sweeping generalizations because nobody likes that feeling. It's very imposed on language, and it feels gross.
Yes, absolutely. So,
Yeah,
and I love that you use humor because it's also a tool
it
that we can
is.
to diffuse conflict. And sometimes putting a mirror in front of somebody is all they needed
Yeah.
to see. It was, oh shoot, okay.
Yeah.
I didn't meet the expectation or the agreement here.
Yeah.
I'm gonna try again next time.
Yeah.
So yeah, that humor is a great tool. I think that's funny. I might actually use that one, Angie.
Thank you. Well,
Always never.
if you have any for the adult kids, because that's what I'm getting better at, is just being able to laugh at myself too, at some of the things, or the overreacting as a mom. Like they'll say something and you're just like, they're trying to get a rise out of you, and they're doing the things and you're just like, okay. So I mean, I'm just trying to laugh a lot more at things that I used to take so serious too.
Oh yeah, that's when you figure that out, you let me
Well, maybe we should have some coaching
know.
sessions.
Yes, we should. No, I do. And I try to realize that with these adult children, these Gen Z adult children of ours, they really are doing the best they can. And, we all were that age
Hmm.
at one time, and growing and learning and making all the mistakes and doing all the things. And I think just being a good listener,
Hmm.
and for me, I've had to learn to not always jump in with the assistance and the help and
That's the hardest part. And
that's the hardest part.
yep.
But to provide that listening ear and to ask, like, are you looking for advice, or are you just looking for uh, someone to vent to? Because I can do both. I
Hmm.
can do both. I just need to know what you need from me. And then there are times where we have to step in and give some guidance, some gentle guidance, because parenting adult children, it's kind of like going bowling with the bumpers on. Like, they're gonna bowl on their own, but the bumpers are there if you really need it. And I feel like parents can be kind of that bumper
Hmm.
when you're guiding, you're not bossing, you're not um, you know, manipulating your adult children to bend your way, through the use of money or emotion or
Guilt. Yeah.
love or anything
Yeah.
like that. Yeah, you're just guiding, and you have your expectations, and then your expectations are set. You stick with your expectations, and then you guide.
Hmm.
And that's been the approach that we've taken. And every day, every week, we are thrown a curveball.
Hmm.
That the bumpers go up, and then we want to just jump in and like grab that bowling ball, and do something with it. But it's hard. It's a process of continual learning and trying to empathize and understand where they're coming from and meeting them where they
Yep.
are at the point they are in their lives.
They're the best teachers, I swear. They have made being a parent, I think, is one of the best. I mean, your kids just give you so many lessons and make you a better human, for sure.
Absolutely. And
Uh,
all they want is their independence and their autonomy. And it's our job to give it to them.
hmm.
That's what we have. Your ultimate goal as a parent is to set the little birdie free and to let them fly and thrive on their own.
Hmm.
And so when they actually do that, though, it's scary.
Yeah.
So,
And then you're
why?
not needed. And so then and your identity, like all of those things. So there's so much around that. But I think that it'd be cool to maybe talk about what would be the pros and the cons of each of those contexts as it relates to our conflict styles, because there's got to be pros and cons to each of those.
So yeah, going back to that Thomas Kuhlman conflict mode instrument that
Hmm.
we talked about. So just to refresh, we've got the accommodators, we call that accommodating, avoiding, compromising, collaborating, and competing. So some of the pros and cons, and there are
Hmm.
plenty more, but accommodating, I can think of a million reasons why accommodating, and we touched on it earlier in the conversation. Some of the pros of accommodating, in my viewpoint, if you don't see the person very often, if you want to preserve the relationship, those are wonderful reasons to accommodate a need or a want from
Hmm.
someone else. And it's letting things just roll off your
Hmm.
back at times. I mean, that's a skill.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know, some of the cons to being a constant accommodator, I think you feel like a doormat.
Hmm. And you have
You know,
resentment, and that's the signal light that you are not. You need to do something different.
right. And when you're starting to feel that way and your needs are not being met, then it's time to do something different.
Switch to a new mode.
Switch
Like,
to a new mode.
what mode can we go to then?
So, pros and cons of the avoiders. Well, the pro of avoiding, I think, is a lot along the same lines as accommodating. It just depends on the relationship. Sometimes you have to if there's a big power differential too,
Mm-hmm.
and you can lose. There's a lot on the line to lose, whether it's your livelihood or whatnot. You can choose to avoid, but that's also a con because that is building resentment over time.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes avoiding it can keep you safe.
Mm-hmm.
We don't underestimate the hackles that go up on the back of your neck when you need to avoid a conflict. It's
Mm-hmm.
there for a reason. Sometimes you have to listen to that, and avoiding that conflict can sometimes, be the safer thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. What about you? Do you see some pros to avoiding?
Yeah, I always use the term, is this a hill I want to die on? Like,
Uh-huh.
do I care that much about it? And like, let's just say, for example, politics is one of the things right now that, everybody's passionate about. But, and there's certain things, there's a couple of hills that I'm going to want to communicate more about, or at least understand where they're coming from. But for the most part, when people are telling me all their opinions and their beliefs, when you go visit people and they just start doing that, I'm not asking, and I will just avoid it like you do, because I didn't ask and I wasn't engaging in that. And so part of it is just recognizing that they don't have very high social awareness, that this isn't clearly a conversation I wanted to have. Or if I did, it would be a two-way conversation. They would ask me questions. It would be a conversation, not a telling session, right?
And it turns into a telling session.
Yeah.
And their EQ is so low that they could use your coaching, by the way.
Yeah.
But
Right.
their EQ is so low that the self-awareness piece is completely absent. And it just depends on the person. But if it is at that point and it is so low that there's really nothing that you can gain from except for more conflict, then yeah, avoiding is going to be the best route for
Hmm.
that.
Yeah.
Um, it's a tough one though, because yeah, politics, religion,
Hmm.
all of the things that grandma used to tell us to stay away from at the
Hmm.
kitchen table, they're all fair game now, it
Hmm.
seems.
Hmm.
And sometimes, and I say this with a little bit of a little tongue in cheek, I don't you wish we went back to that? Like, let's just not talk about those things for a while. But of course, in our deeper relationships, we have to talk about those
Yeah.
things. So sometimes we are going to need to compromise and collaborate,
Hmm.
and those are going to be really important skills with the people that really, really matter in our everyday lives and that are impacting our emotional and mental health.
Hmm.
So there is a time to compromise, with those folks if it's important to you.
Hmm.
So compromise is an interesting one because when I ask my students to describe, what is compromise, they say, "Oh, it's just coming to a better solution," and I'm like, "No, no, let's break down compromise. What does it mean?" Well, it means that both sides are winning. Okay, that's great. That's a good start. But it's also that both sides are losing. So it's a win-win, but it's also a loss-loss, because
Hmm.
when you're compromising, you're and negotiating, you really are giving up part of your position in order to meet the other person halfway. That's what a good compromise is.
Hmm.
That's the meaning of the word. And so I think a lot of folks forget that it's also a loss, and you have to know what you're willing to lose
Hmm.
and if that's okay with you and
Hmm.
if that is going to meet your goal.
Right.
So I think that's an important point. It can work positively, and an example I would give is, let's just take a, a big piece of chocolate cake that is in the fridge. You like chocolate
Oh,
cake, right?
yes. I love it.
Love it. And you've got this big piece of chocolate cake, and Rob goes out for the evening and he's going to go meet some buddies and go do whatever, go do his thing. But then his plans change. And so that cake is waiting for you in the fridge. You were going to watch Netflix and put on your favorite Bridgerton or whatever show of the day, like we want to watch by ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
without anyone around. And you were going to dig in and have that cake and be all by yourself. But then his plans change and he's home. So what do you do with that piece of cake? What do you do with that piece of cake? I
Share
don't
it.
know. What would you do?
Share the cake.
Well, that's I'm going for that answer,
Yeah.
right? That's
Yeah.
what I tell my students. You share the cake and you compromise, you give a little, and then you share maybe the remote and
Mm-hmm.
watch a show you both could agree on.
Mm-hmm.
In my case, like maybe we're not watching Bridgerton, but we're also not watching a Western, we're gonna watch something that we both can agree on.
Couples
Or
retreat.
World War. Yeah, yeah, totally. So, compromising ends up
Yeah.
being a good thing because you get to share the cake with your loved one and you
Mm-hmm.
get to enjoy the evening together. And it's just a little unexpected surprise
Yeah.
where that's the best case scenario for a compromise. So getting to look at it, it's not always a bad thing to have to give up your position.
Mm-hmm.
It can be a really positive thing as well.
Yeah, it
uh,
depends on how you frame it, right?
Depends on how you frame it, and that's why I like to use my chocolate cake example, because as long as you like cake.
Well, if it was one piece, it's harder to share than if it's a whole cake.
That is true. That is true. So
A
you
whole
may
cake,
hide it for another time.
I don't need the whole cake. So, but if there was one piece waiting for it, it'd be a little harder to share it. But, here, I'll give you a bite and you
I'll give you a bite, but you're still compromising.
Yes.
You got to share with your
Yeah.
loved one and have a
Yeah.
good night. So
Yeah.
everyone's happy.
Yeah.
But there again, there's some problems with compromise. If you're constantly compromising things like your values,
Mm-hmm.
your morals, your ethics, that's not what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
That's no compromise um, for long-term success.
Like having children, that discussion, right?
Yeah, we talked about that
Yeah.
before the show. So, let's say you're in a relationship and one of you really want children. As a matter of fact, you want 4 or 5 children and the other wants none. What compromise can you make? A golden retriever is not a compromise, not for the person who wants 4 children.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the issues in terms of interpersonal relationships that you really need to dig into and have some really meaningful, deep conversations about, because those are the kinds of issues that can really affect a relationship long term.
Mm-hmm.
There's no good compromise there. So yeah, those kinds of issues are tough. Tough when it comes to your values. How do
Mm-hmm.
you compromise your values?
Right.
So yeah, something long and hard to think about.
Mm-hmm.
And I do want to give a little caveat there. Your values are one thing, but being closed-minded is another. So, that's another conversation.
Yep. Mindset is different than values
Yes.
because, yeah, we could just go on and on and on that. But
Yeah.
yeah, for sure.
That growth mindset and an open mindset for growth, positive growth in your life is very different than sacrificing your deep held values and who you are as a person. So
Mm-hmm.
I think those two can coexist peacefully within an individual.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, so then we have collaborating,
Mm-hmm.
and that is really the goal, right? Is to collaborate. I wish we had time to collaborate on every decision. We don't always have time.
Mm-hmm.
That is the biggest con, I think, of collaboration. It does require a lot of prep work and time.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, as a leader of an organization or a parent of a household, you don't have time to collaborate on every single decision you make.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you just need to say what it is and move on.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, a different style. But collaboration is really cool because that's where we get to see the growth and the creativity and the new way of looking at problems from different angles,
Mm-hmm.
and understanding each other's needs, coming together to make something different and better than what you started with.
Yeah.
That is a really cool outcome of collaboration.
Yeah, and leading people through change or anything that's going to affect them, like we talked about earlier. It's great to get their feedback and their input. If you take it back to kids and you create a mature list and you tell them what they're doing, and you impose all that, they're not going to respond as well as if you gave the kids, here's a bunch of chores. I'd like you to circle the ones that you think you'd like to take and you'd like to take, and we gotta figure this out. And then everybody picks four, and then that's the ones we're responsible for. They're way more on board than they are with you do laundry, you do,
Mhm.
they at least got to have some say in it. And it applies in the workplace too. Like
Absolutely.
those same things, giving people a little bit of choice. It does take more time, but often if you take that extra time, it often goes way better. And so then the end part is shorter. It comes to completion better and more aligned than the quick start that actually falls apart later because nobody
Wow.
was on
Yeah,
board.
that is so true. And I wish that we did this more in education. We don't give our students the autonomy to choose assignments that work for them,
Mm-hmm.
to choose modalities that for turning in work, for example, for projects that work with what their interests are, because it takes a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wish we did this more in education,
Mm-hmm.
in higher education specifically. Montessori schools for young ones, they've got it figured out. They allow children to pick and choose their projects and their learning focus for the day, and then we lose that
Mm-hmm.
along the way. And goodness, I think it's something that I could work on in my own in my own teaching, is giving my students more autonomy to choose to meet the outcomes of the course. Of course, that's
Yes.
always number one, but you can meet the outcomes by you can get there different ways.
Choosing your own adventure. Maybe you could
Yeah.
write a paper, you could do a presentation, you could interview somebody in industry, whatever. Like you could have a few different things, and this is your final assignment. But you don't. Everybody could pick what that looks like, right? Or a
Yeah. Yeah.
capstone. Yeah.
And that's truly collaborative learning. And you learn and grow so much when you have the time to be able to do that and to
Mm-hmm.
explore your interests and your talents, and to build your self-efficacy through those types of choose your own adventures. I
Right.
think is really, really cool.
Yeah. So we're getting to the time where I want to get, if you could talk to your younger self and you were, let's just say, that age that you're teaching right now, young 22, 23-year-old self,
Hmm.
whether you were just in college or maybe, starting your first job in that phase of life, what are some of the things, um, what's some of the wisdom as it relates to interpersonal skills and communication and conflict and feedback and all the stuff, emotional intelligence? If you could give yourself the wisdom you have now, what would be some of the wisdom you would want to impart?
Oh goodness, Angie, there's so many directions I could go. And I think my train of thought at the moment is to advocate for yourself. No one else is going to do it for you. And doing so in a kind, clear way. You don't have to say yes to everything, but do say yes to opportunities that could grow you as a person. Say no to the little stuff that is going to bog you down. I spent so much of my 20s and 30s getting bogged down with other people's requests and wants and desires, and can you do that? Can you do this? And yeah, sure, sure, sure. You don't have to be in everyone's wedding, and you don't have to go to every event, and you don't have to say yes to every request that your boss makes. You can definitely set your boundaries and expectations, be clear about it, set it in advance.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's what I would give. Don't spread yourself so thin. You don't have to say yes to everything, and you don't have to say no to everything.
Mm-hmm.
You need to understand yourself and, pick and choose what's important to you. Because I don't know about you, but I spend a lot of time trying to be a people pleaser, and it never works out. You always feel that resentment that we talked about earlier in the podcast,
Mm-hmm.
because you are accommodating and just or avoiding when you're the people pleaser most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one piece of advice. I think the other piece of advice that I am really into this right now is this idea of brain health and brain growth. And it could be stemming from a place. My mom has dementia and it's getting really bad. And I'm of the age at 50 where my mortality is right in front of me too. So I'm thinking, how can I do better and get better and not have the same struggles that she's having at her age? And so, doing things like cardiovascular health and all of the physical things you can do, having a good diet. But also, this is the thing that's been intriguing me lately. And I love listening to Andrew Huberman, his podcast. I know you're a big fan too, because I've heard you talk about him before.
Yeah. They're just long. That's only.
They're really long. It sometimes takes me a week to listen to one. But,
yeah, right.
Okay, it's okay. But on a recent podcast, he and a guest were talking about tenacity and growing your brain. And I know I'm going to really simplify what the science behind it. So if you want to check out Andrew Huberman's podcast, feel free. But you grow this area of your brain, and it's called the anterior mid-cingulate cortex, the AMCC. You grow this part of your brain by doing hard things. Think about that. You can grow your brain for life by doing things that you don't want to do.
Like cold plunging. I've been doing that. Ooh,
mental
I don't
tenacity.
like it. I don't want it. I don't feel like it, but I do it.
But you do it. And so having hard conversations. Now, Huberman didn't talk about hard conversations in the context of his presentation of the study, but I'm talking about it because I think it makes sense. Like all of these hard, difficult things that help you grow, you don't want to do it, but you do it. You have the hard conversations, you do the workout, you do the cold plunge, you take the leadership course, you say yes to a position that you may not feel quite ready for.
You speak at the conference, you do the things that people ask you to that push you outside the comfort. That's awesome.
The comfort, and it keeps your brain growing. And is it going to stave off dementia? I don't know, but I'm not taking any chances.
Right.
I'm going to do everything I can to try and keep my brain health and to keep striving to grow the brain and, grow other parts of my mental, emotional health as well in the journey. So that's the advice I would give my younger self. Do the hard things. Keep growing, keep learning.
I love that. That is so good. And it's a journey that never ends. And the cool part is the research is always improving and enhancing. So, we might know more, we'll know more things in 6 months than we know now about all of these things. And when what does work, it's just incredible. I love the work you're doing with your students and with organizations. And I'm grateful to have people like you that are helping the next generation see their talent, see their potential, help them grow, help them build skills. That's what we're all here to do. And I'm grateful for you being on the Leader You podcast and sharing this message of this is a skill just like anything else. Doing it's going to help you grow your brain. It's going to help you get better at relationships. It's going to help you navigate life easier. There's really no negative effects from building this skill.
Absolutely. And Angie, I want to thank you truly for being an advocate for me, for my growth as a human. You have given me a great example, and I know that you are so well respected in the circle of women that I know and look up to. So thank you for that. And thank you for having me today. It has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. I thank you all for listening to the Leader You podcast. If you found this information helpful, please listen to it, like it, and subscribe it. And the best way to show compliment is to share it with other people, because you just never know who needs to hear this message. Thank you so much.